In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to take you through a $1 million mistake that I made with property and shares. This episode will reveal the key differences that I wish I had noticed early in my investment journey and early in my wealth creation journey. It doesn't matter if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. What I reveal in this episode could potentially change your financial life. Stick around as we dive into my $1 million property mistake. Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BetaShares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, BetaShares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with BetaShares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. Early in my 20s, I fell in love with this idea of running businesses and investing in businesses. I read Warren Buffett books, watched all the videos on YouTube, and just generally loved this concept that I could make money while I sleep or put my money on the line into productive assets. Naturally, for most people that listen to people like Warren Buffett or read books like One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch, you kind of fall into this idea that businesses are the best thing to do. And like most people in my 20s or potentially people in their early 30s, I thought this one strategy is the only strategy. And so naturally, I gravitated to everything that these famous investors would tell me or that I would read in books. This is a classic case of confirmation bias. And you've probably seen it with people who talk about property, people who talk about crypto and Bitcoin, and people who talk about shares. If someone comes across too passionate about just one thing, it means they've probably suffered from confirmation bias and haven't actually looked around to see what else is out there. In this video, I want to tell you about this idea of using every tool in your toolkit to grow your financial wealth, because this is by far the biggest mistake I've ever made. Now, you could say that if you looked at what I do for a profession, the businesses that I have, something like this, you could say that, well, hey, Owen, it sounds like you did pretty well from what you did anyway. And I don't want to take away from the fact that, yeah, I'm pretty proud of what we've built at Rask and the other companies along the way. But this one change probably wouldn't have interrupted any of that. So I could have had my cake and ate it too. And that is what I want to tell you about. So cast your mind back a few years. In fact, it's over 10 years now. I was in my 20s and I'd just begun learning about this thing called finance in a real big way. I was studying famous investors, reading websites like The Motley Fool and Intelligent Investor. I was doing all the cliche things. And at the time, I'd saved up a pretty good amount of money from my contract job that I was doing while I was studying. And I started to discover dividend stocks and growth stocks, technology, cloud computing was a thing, all of these amazing companies, SaaS businesses. There were so many good things to invest in. And early days, I did pretty well. In my early 20s, I probably would have saved up the better part of $100,000 between investments and cash that I had in the bank. And I was dedicated to becoming a really good investor. Maybe not the best ever, but I was definitely on a path to be a really good investor. And I must say that things did work out pretty well in that regard for the next 10 years. However, I made one fatal mistake. When I was in my 20s, I had the chance to buy a property, and I want you to imagine not something that's nice, not something that's in a housing estate that's brand new, not an apartment, but something up in the hills that was surrounded by trees and all those sticks and branches and leaves that love to fall down on the old tin roofs, onto the hills hoist out the back, and maybe even shatter a bit of asbestos on the way through. That's the type of weatherboard shack I'm talking about. It was dilapidated. You could barely live in it. But you know what? I thought, I'm pretty hands-on. A couple of my mates are plumbers, electricians, carpenters. Surely I can string this thing together. Now, you might be thinking, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Well, it turns out the suburb that I was looking at later went on to be one of the best performing suburbs in the country. This was a suburb that's on the train line. This house in particular was on a dirt road. It was a flat block that overlooked a gully. It was on about 1,400 square meters. So This block, yeah, the house was a bit run down, but the block was really good. The location was great. It's near a really good school and less than a kilometre from the train line and main shops. In Melbourne, that's a pretty good thing. And so I thought to myself, well, we could look at this. But sure enough, I had the kind of cliches of Warren Buffett and all of those other famous investors ringing in my ear. Warren Buffett obviously famously still lives in the same house that he bought many, many decades ago, despite building a business that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So I thought to myself, well, who buys property? It's property or shares. It's not property and shares. So I stuck with my stocks and I looked the other way when this property sold for around about $300,000. Let's fast forward a bit to today. That property, I would say with some pretty decent TLC, not in any great way, but just some TLC at least I could have done, is worth definitely over $1 million. So this is about 10 years later. You can do the math. It's probably $700,000 in the positive, minus a loan that probably would have gone down a little bit in that time. This is one of the fundamental things that I got wrong. Is I could have used my deposit, which was around about $100,000 at the time, 1/3 of the property, bought the house, and then either fixed it up and improved the value of it, then redrawn the money, some of the money at least that I'd put into it as part of a refinance, which I then could have used to invest in the shares I was going to buy anyway. Meaning I could have had my cake, the property, and eaten it too, which is the shares. So I could have bought the property, refinanced and had a loan, a bigger loan against it, but turned some of the loan that I would have refinanced into an investment loan that would have been tax deductible and would have paid me franking credits on the shares that I had purchased using that money. So let's do that again. Bought the property, refinanced some of the loan, used that refinance money to invest in shares that pay me franking credits, and I claim a tax deduction on the interest because it's an investment loan. You could probably, picking up what I'm putting down, this is what we call, in effect, an equity release strategy or a debt recycling strategy, depending on what I would have done next. So we would have had a great tax outcome, an asset that the loan was secured against, which at the time interest rates were on their way down, property prices rapidly on the rise, and a stock market portfolio that was also rapidly on the rise. So it's not just me comparing the original $100,000 I had to the shares and property that I could have bought. Remember that I could have had that $100,000 and got a $300,000 property that increased from that time. So if we assumed 8% growth, that same property today is worth over $1 million. But had I just say, for example, at one time throughout that property's life cycle, say 2 or 3 years in, I redrew up to 80% of the property's value in a loan, why not, huh? I could have then used that amount of money to invest in a share portfolio or an ETF portfolio that then would have grown at 7, 8, 9, 10% per year with tax deductible interest along the way. That portfolio itself would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars today. So there you have it, more than a $1 million turnaround, just from being a bit more open-minded. Had I not thought property or shares, Bitcoin or shares, this or that, it would have, which is a false choice, by the way, it would have been, well, why don't I just use the best of both? Because in Australia, this whole concept of financial planning is vitally important. I had missed a very important step. When you have a property, the loan that you can get on that property in Australia is far superior to any other loan you will ever get. Because the banks in Australia are readily available to lend you money against your property, particularly if it's a good investment grade property, which is one that's, on a good sized block, not far from train lines and all of those types of things. If you buy a good investment property or home, effectively you can redraw and refinance some money away from that, increasing your loan size for sure, but then use that money appropriately, whether it's to do a renovation or invest in shares and ETFs. And so my first big lesson from this is, number one, don't be blindsided into thinking that there's only one way of doing things. Property or shares, growth or income, crypto or shares. index funds, active versus passive. There are so many false choices that are created because of people's self-fulfilling narratives. They want to make you think that the only way to invest is their way. And that strategy is the right one. It's not. In my experience of doing this over 10 years and speaking to thousands of investors, every single person is unique. Every single property is unique too. So by default, if you and I live in different houses, our financial situation is going to be different. So make the most of all the tools you have available. Right now, property, shares, even using super to fund your first home if that's where you're at, or if you're on the way out of your home through the downsizer strategy, there are so many different ways that you can intermix all of the different asset classes and investment types to get the right outcome for you. Another thing that I would say is that if you're starting a business, it's far better to think about, well, should I be going for a loan before I start my business? Because after you start your business, it's much harder to get a loan, even though you may be earning just as much. Getting a loan when you're self-employed is far more difficult because banks typically require 2 years of financials. Even then, they may not be too inclined to give you the same home loan that you would get if you were just receiving, a month's worth of salary with 2 pay slips. Another thing that's important to understand is that not everything goes up straight away after you invest in it. I wish it was always the case. I didn't know that property was going to go up. I didn't know that the share market was going to stage a miraculous bull run through a global pandemic. I didn't know all of those things for sure, but one of the things that I did is that I made sure that I had some money saved up and I had the option. This is really important. By having the optionality, as we call it, you give yourself the potential to make good financial decisions, even if you don't make the best one. If you think about it, Warren Buffett, now with hundreds of billions of dollars, to him, basically anything he does is probably going to be a good choice because he's got no debt, nothing's going to send him broke, so pretty much anything that he does is positive. If you put Warren Buffett in the same situation as someone who is heavily indebted with no good options, everything is going to seem like a mistake. The key point is the position that you find yourself in and how you get there is what's important. Another key takeaway for me is this. When you're starting out investing, it's far more important to focus on the big financial planning strategies than it is to focus on your investment returns or finding the lowest fee ETF. That stuff doesn't really matter. If your portfolio is not at $50,000 or $100,000 yet, it doesn't really matter if the fee is 0.1% or 0.07%. Who cares? Just invest. The most important thing is that you get the financial planning right. And by that I mean things like, am I saving for a house? Which house am I going to buy? What are my financial goals? Can I reinvest in my career to earn more in the future? Is this the right career for me? Is my partner aligned with our goals? Should I start a business? Should I take on secondary work or a part-time job just to boost my deposit to buy a house or even save up an emergency cash buffer? Am I living life within my means or is my spending out of control? Do I find myself paying off a credit card every month? The key points is that so much of what you do with money and how fast you get ahead in those first 10 years is about the personal finance, not about the investing. Of course, if you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest, I would highly encourage you to start out on micro investing platforms, to start paying attention to your superannuation and making sure it's invested the way you want it to be done, or even creating a fake account and just tracking what you would have invested in so you can get the reps in. Listening to podcasts like this, taking one of our free courses, you can still invest in your knowledge that compounds over decades, not just a portfolio. So there are so many takeaways that I wish I could still instill upon you. But if the one thing that you remember from this episode is this is make me very happy, is that keep your mind open. Don't prepare your portfolio and your financial strategy for a single given future. Don't bet it all on one thing. Be open to what comes to you. Embrace it. Be curious about the different investment types, about the financial planning. Don't overlook that stuff. And the second thing I really want you to leave with is this idea of optionality. Make sure that you're in a financial position that you can't be broken, but that you could, if you wanted to, take advantage of opportunities as they arise. Just like this house that I could have bought, but I didn't. Obviously, I took that money and started Rask, which is what it is today. But there are so many things I could have done simply because I had good savings hygiene, I worked hard, and I put myself in a net cash position, not a net debt position. That's all I've got for today's episode, or shall I say lesson. If you want to reach out and share your biggest mistakes with me, I'd love to know what you think and how you went about kind of unraveling why you ended up in that situation and what the lesson was for you. Now, obviously, this is a positive mistake to make. Sometimes there are just really bad mistakes that you can't really learn too many lessons from other than, ouch, I wish that didn't happen. I'd love to know what you think. Be sure to reach out to me via the link in your podcast player. If you're on YouTube, you can use the comments. What was your biggest mistake with money and what did you learn from it? Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.